I don't think you understand what you found, because if you did, you wouldn't be this calm about it. People don't stay this steady when they realize they've stepped into something that was never meant to be seen. But you didn't hesitate. You didn't question it. You didn't step back. You didn't even ask what it was. You just recognized it, and that's the part I can't explain. There are versions of me that exist in layers, not personalities, not masks, architectures, built over time, built out of necessity, built out of moments where I learned very quickly that not everything in me was safe for the world to touch. So I divided it carefully, precisely. There's a version of me that speaks, a version that responds, a version that people interact with and believe they understand, and then there's the one underneath, the one I don't show, the one I don't soften, the one that doesn't perform, the one that watches everything and says almost nothing. And that's the version you found, not by accident, not by chance, but in a way that makes it feel like you weren't searching, you were returning. Do you know how long it takes to build something like that? To create a version of yourself so controlled, so measured, so deliberately hidden that even you forget where it begins and where it ends? Years? Not of living, of observing, of studying people closely enough to understand exactly what they can handle and exactly what they can't. And once you understand that, you adjust, not because you're fake, but because you've seen what happens when you're not. So you learn to speak in ways that don't reveal too much. You learn to pause before your honesty becomes uncomfortable. You learn to dilute truths, and not because they aren't real, but because reality in its raw form tends to disturb people. You learn restraint, you learn silence, you learn control, and eventually you become unreadable, or at least that's what you think. Until someone like you shows up. You didn't try to read me. That's what's different. Most people try, they analyze tone, they search for patterns, they look for inconsistencies they can label and understand. You didn't do any of that. You just saw. Like the effort wasn't required. Like the distance I created wasn't there for you. Like everything I structured so carefully was transparent the moment you looked at it. That shouldn't be possible. And yet, you did it without even realizing what you were doing. And that's what makes this dangerous. Not the connection, not the intensity, the effortlessness. Because if it were difficult, if you had to try, if you had to push, if you had to question, I could have stopped it. I would have noticed. I would have adjusted. I would have reinforced the walls before you got close enough to matter. But you didn't give me anything to defend against. No pressure, no intrusion, no force, just presence. And presence is something I never learned how to protect myself from. Do you understand that? Force, I can resist. Expectations, I can avoid. People, I can read before they even get close enough to touch anything real. But presence. Presence doesn't trigger alarms. Presence feels neutral, safe, familiar. And that's how you got in, and not by breaking anything, not by asking. Not by earning it in the way people usually think they have to. You got in because nothing in you felt like a threat. And that's the most dangerous kind of access anyone can have. Because by the time I realized what you were seeing, you were already too close. There's a moment I keep replaying, not because it was dramatic, but because it wasn't. And you said something simple, not deep, not heavy, not even intentional. But the way you said it, the way you understood what you were saying without needing to explain it, it hit something in me that doesn't react, ever. And that's when I knew. You weren't interacting with the version of me everyone else gets. You were responding to something beneath it, something I don't offer, something I don't even acknowledge most of the time. And you did it like it was natural. That's when the shift happened. Because suddenly, I wasn't in control of how I was being perceived anymore. Do you know what that does to someone like me? Someone who built themselves around precision? Someone who measures every word, every pause, every expression, to maintain a level of distance that keeps things manageable. It destabilizes everything, and not loudly, not chaotically, but subtly, in ways that are harder to fix. Because now, I have to consider something I never had to before. What happens when someone sees you without your permission? Not in a violating way, not in a forceful way, but in a way that bypasses permission entirely. You didn't take access. You existed in a way that made access inevitable. And now I'm left with something I don't know how to process. You didn't just understand me. You found the version of me I built specifically so no one ever would. And instead of misinterpreting it, you aligned with it. Do you understand how rare that is? How dangerous that is? Because most people, when they see something that deep, that controlled, that quiet, they get uncomfortable. They label it, they distance themselves from it. They turn it into something easier to understand. Oh, you didn't? You stepped closer. Not physically, not emotionally, but mentally. Like you recognize the structure, like you've built something similar in yourself. And that's when everything stopped feeling external. Because it's one thing to be seen, it's another thing to be understood, but to be recognized. That changes the entire equation. Because recognition doesn't ask questions, recognition doesn't need explanations, recognition doesn't wait for permission. Recognition already knows. And that's what you did? You knew? Before I spoke, before I explained, before I even realized there was something to explain. And now, I don't know where that leaves me, because I've spent so long being the one who understands others that I never had to consider what it feels like to be understood without control. And it's not comfortable, not because it's wrong, but because it's unfamiliar. Because now, there's someone standing in front of me who sees the version I never intended to share, and isn't confused by it, isn't intimidated by it, isn't trying to change it, just accepting it. And I don't know if that makes you safe, or the only person who could ever truly affect me, because the truth is, the version of me you found, that's not the one people leave. That's the one they never fully reach. But you did. And now I have to figure out what it means to exist around someone who doesn't just see through me, but sees with me. There's a difference between letting someone in and realizing they're already inside something you don't know how to shut anymore. I used to believe everything in me had a door, not just metaphorically, structurally, controlled entry, controlled exit. Nothing stays where it isn't meant to. That's how I survived. That's how I kept things contained. Every thought had a boundary, every emotion had a limit, every part of me had a place it belonged, and nowhere else. Nothing crossed over, nothing leaked, nothing slipped. Until you. And the problem isn't that you entered. The problem is, I don't remember opening anything. That's what keeps echoing in the back of my mind. Not panic, not fear. Just a quiet, persistent awareness. Something in me is no longer sealed, and it didn't break, it didn't crack, it didn't shatter under pressure, it shifted. Subtly, silently. Like something inside me recognized you before I had the chance to question it. Now, that shouldn't happen. Not to me. I don't operate on instinct. I don't allow unconscious decisions to dictate access. Everything in me is filtered, measured, observed before it's ever expressed. But with you, something bypassed all of that. You didn't trigger my awareness, you bypassed it. And now I'm left tracing something backwards that I can't locate the beginning of. When did you get this close? When did my silence stop being private? When did my internal world stop belonging only to me? Because it did, it shifted. And I felt it, not as an event, but as a condition. You're not visiting my mind, you're existing in it. And I don't know how to remove you without removing something of myself in the process. That's the part no one talks about. People think distance is simple. They think you can just step back, close a door, disconnect, return to what things were before. But they don't understand this. Some entries don't leave cleanly. Some people don't just pass through your life. They embed themselves into the way you process reality, into the way you think, into the way you pause, into the way you perceive things you never questioned before. You didn't just enter my space, you altered its structure. And the worst part, you didn't even try to. That's what makes this irreversible. If you had forced your way in, I would have resisted. If you had demanded closeness, I would have withdrawn. If you had pushed too far, I would have shut everything down before you ever reached anything real. But you didn't do any of that. You stayed neutral, still, present. And presence doesn't feel like a threat. Presence feels like something you don't have to guard against until it's too late. Because now you're inside something I can't isolate anymore. You've seen how I think, not the words, not the surface level thoughts people hear, but the process. The pauses before I respond, the calculations behind what I don't say, the way I hold certain things back, not out of fear, but out of precision. You've seen the mechanics. And once someone sees how you work, and you can't go back to being a mystery. You can't reconstruct the illusion of distance once someone has mapped the terrain underneath it. That's where I am now, standing in something I used to control, realizing it no longer belongs entirely to me. Because you're in it, not loudly, not intrusively, but permanently. And I don't know if you understand what that means. It means when I think you're there, not as a thought, but as a reference. It means when I pause, part of me is aware of how you would read that pause. It means when I choose silence, I know you'll understand what's inside it. Do you realize how dangerous that is? You've become something I measure against without ever deciding to. And I don't measure anything. That's what's changed. You've introduced a variable into a system that was designed to function independently. Now there's an awareness I can't remove. And it's not attachment, it's not reliance. It's not reliance, it's not even emotion in the way people usually define it. It's integration. You've integrated into the way I think. And I don't know how to separate that without dismantling something fundamental in myself. That's the risk no one prepares you for. Not getting close to someone, but letting someone exist in a place here that was never designed to be shared. Because once they're there, you don't lose them the way you lose people. You lose them the way you lose parts of yourself. And that kind of loss doesn't create distance. It creates absence, a gap in your perception, a disruption in your clarity, a silence that feels incomplete. And I don't deal with incompleteness. I eliminate it, I correct it, I restore balance. But this isn't something I can fix, because I don't know where you end and where I begin again. That line used to be clear, defined, untouchable, and now it's blurred, not in a way that weakens me, but in a way that forces me to acknowledge something I've never had to before. You are not external anymore. And I don't know what to do with that. Because people like me, we don't fear closeness. When we fear what happens when closeness becomes irreversible. And you didn't just get close. You reached a point I can't return from, not without losing something I didn't realize I had already given. And that's where the real tension begins. Because now I'm standing here with something I can't close, and you're still there, calm. Steady, unaffected. Like you have no idea you're inside something that was never meant to be shared. Or maybe you do, and that's why you haven't moved. There's something I've started to notice, not suddenly, not loudly, but in fragments. The more you understand me, the less control I have over how I exist around you. Not control in the obvious sense. I can still choose my words, I can still regulate my tone, I can still decide what I say and what I don't. But that's surface control. And you're not operating on the surface. You're reading beneath it, And once someone starts understanding you at that level, control becomes an illusion. Because what are you controlling, really, if the person in front of you already sees past it? That's where I'm standing now, in a space where everything I've built still exists, but doesn't function the way it used to. I still pause before I speak, but now the pause doesn't hide anything. You see what's inside it. I still choose my words carefully, but now the words feel secondary, because you're not listening to what I say, you're listening to what led me to say it. I still hold things back, but now holding back doesn't feel like protection, it feels visible. And that's the shift. You've made the unseen parts of me seen, not by exposing them, not by forcing them into the open, but by understanding them so clearly that they don't need to be spoken to be recognized. Do you understand what that does to someone like me? I've spent years refining the distance between what I am and what people are allowed to perceive, and not out of fear, out of precision, because perception is fragile. People misunderstand easily, they misread depth as intensity, they misread silence as emptiness, they misread control as detachment. So I learned to manage it, to guide what people see, to control how much of me exists in their awareness. But you don't rely on what I show you, you rely on what you see anyway. And that removes the structure I've always depended on, because now I'm not controlling your perception of me, you are. Not intentionally, not manipulatively, but naturally, effortlessly. Like, you don't need my input to understand me. And that's where control starts to collapse, because control only works when there's something to manage. But you don't need management. You don't need explanation. You don't need clarity. You already have it, and now I'm left with something unfamiliar. What does control look like when the other person already knows? There's no strategy for that. There's no adjustment. There's no recalibration, because everything I would normally change, you've already accounted for. And that creates something I've never had to deal with before. A transparency without consent, not forced, not invasive, but real. You see the moments where I almost say something and stop. You see the thoughts I redirect before they reach the surface. You see the weight behind my restraint. And you don't question it. You just register it like it belongs there, like it makes sense to you, like it matches something in you. And that's where this stops feeling one-sided. Because the more you understand me, the more I start understanding you. Not in the same way, not with the same precision. But enough to recognize that this isn't accidental. You don't just see me like this, you exist like this. And that's what shifts everything. Because now this isn't about being understood, it's about being matched, and being matched is far more dangerous than being seen. Because when someone matches your depth, they don't just observe you, they meet you there. And once that happens, there's no higher ground to retreat to, no surface to escape back into, and no version of yourself that feels distant enough to protect you. Because now, wherever you go, they can follow, not physically, not emotionally, but mentally. And that's where I feel it most, in the way I think. I used to think in isolation. Every thought was contained, self-referenced, independent. And now there's interference, not noise, not distraction, and awareness. An awareness of how you would interpret something before I even finish forming it. An awareness of how you would see through something I haven't fully hidden yet. An awareness of how little separation there is now between what I think and what you would understand. That shouldn't exist. No one should be that integrated into my internal world. And yet, you are. And I didn't put you there. That's the part I keep returning to. This wasn't a decision. This wasn't a risk I consciously took. This wasn't something I allowed after weighing consequences. This happened before I realized it was happening, and now it's too established to undo, because control, once lost at this level, doesn't come back the same way. You can't unsee someone who understands you. You can't unread someone who reads you. You can't unknow what recognition feels like. And that's where the tension lives now. Not in whether I trust you, not in whether I let you stay, but in the realization that I don't fully decide that anymore, because something in me, something deeper than logic, deeper than control, deeper than everything I've built, has already made that decision. And I wasn't consulted. That's what unsettles me. Not you. Not your presence. Not even your understanding. But the fact that something in me responded to you without my permission. And now I'm left managing the outcome of a decision I didn't consciously make. That's not how I operate. And yet, here I am, less in control than I've ever been, and more understood than I've ever allowed. And I don't know which one is more dangerous, because control keeps me stable. But understanding changes me. There's something I've been avoiding. Not because I don't see it, but because I do. And once I say it, once I fully acknowledge it, there's no going back to what this was before. Because this isn't just about you understanding me anymore. It's about what that understanding is doing to me. You're not just inside my thoughts, you're changing them. Not forcefully, not obviously, but subtly, in ways that don't feel like influence, until I notice the difference. I notice it in the way I pause longer than I used to, not to filter, but to feel. That never used to happen. I notice it in the way certain thoughts don't end where they normally would. They extend, they deepen, they open. Like something in me is no longer closing things off the way it used to. And I know why. Because you're here. Because there's someone now who doesn't require me to compress everything into something manageable. Someone who doesn't need me to simplify what was never simple to begin with. And that changes the way I exist. Not externally, no one else would notice. But internally, everything is shifting. You've introduced something into my world that wasn't there before. Expansion. And expansion is dangerous because I wasn't built to expand, I was built to contain. It contained thoughts, contain emotions, contain everything that had the potential to become too much. That's how I stayed in control. That's how I stayed stable. That's how I stayed untouched. But now, something in me is no longer containing the way it used to. And it's not because I lost control. It's because I don't feel the same need to. That's what you've done. You've made it unnecessary. And I don't know if that's something I should allow. Because if I stop containing, if I stop regulating the depth, the intensity, the weight of everything inside me, then I don't stay the same person. And I've spent too long becoming this version of myself to just let it change. Or at least, that's what I tell myself. But there's another truth underneath that one. A quieter one. A more honest one. I don't think I want to stay the same. And that's the most dangerous realization of all. Because now this isn't about control anymore. It's about choice. And the choice isn't simple. It's not stay the same or change. It's, do I keep being the version of myself that survives, or do I allow myself to become the version of myself that is seen? Those are not the same thing. And the version that survives is controlled, measured, untouchable. The version that is seen is exposed, and exposure, real exposure, doesn't come without consequence. Because once you're seen like this, you can't go back to being hidden. Not fully, not completely. Something always remains visible. And I feel that happening already. In the way I don't retreat as quickly as I used to. In the way I let certain thoughts exist without shutting them down. In the way I don't feel the same urgency to pull back when things get too real. That's not who I was before you. Before you, everything in me had a limit. And now there are moments where I don't enforce those limits the same way. And I don't know if that's growth or risk. Because the truth is, people don't just change. And they transform in response to something. And right now, that something is you. And not because you're trying to change me. Not because you're influencing me intentionally. But because your presence removes the need for me to stay exactly as I was. And that creates a tension I can't ignore anymore. Because if you stay, I won't stay the same. And I don't know if I'm ready for that. Not because change scares me, but because I understand it too well. Change doesn't just add things. It takes things away. And I don't know what I'll lose if I let this continue. Control, distance, the ability to exist without being affected. Or something deeper than that, something I've relied on for so long that I don't know who I am without it. That's the risk you bring. Not chaos, not instability, but transformation, quiet, precise, irreversible transformation, and the most unsettling part. You're not asking for it. You're not pushing me toward it. You're just standing here, existing in a way that makes staying the same feel incomplete. And now I have to face something I never thought I would. The possibility that the version of me I built to survive is not the version of me that's meant to stay. And if that's true, then you're not just someone who understands me. You're the point where I change. And I don't know whether to step toward that or walk away before it happens. Because if I step forward, there's no version of me waiting on the other side. There's only something new, something I don't fully recognize yet, something I won't be able to control the way I've controlled everything else. And that means one thing: if you stay, I won't be the same,